Picture this. It's Saturday morning and you're on your John Deere compact tractor. You're effortlessly breaking ground on your new landscaping project. Next, you're moving piles of rocks just by moving a lever. And now, you're enjoying the warmth of the sun as you clear brush across your pasture. We could keep trying to put you in the moment, but to really understand everything you can do with a John Deere compact tractor, you just have to get in the seat. Learn more at johndeere.com/get-in-the-seat or visit a dealer near you.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about security at the Democratic National Convention, government bloat, Illinois prisons, and mandated relaxation in Illinois schools. Then the Center Square's Dan McCaleb and Katrina Peterson will further discuss those stories and more. That's straight ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. Wirepoints President Ted Dabrowski is pointing out the growth of the public sector, and new numbers show over 140,000 Illinois government workers and retirees took in more than $100,000 in salaries or pensions in 2023. Katrina Peterson reports.
Dabrowski said there's a problem recently and nationally where more and more Americans are saying if you can't beat them, join them. But Dabrowski said the bigger problem is the tax burden for Illinoisans paying large salaries for government workers.
You know, if you can't make it here, if it's too expensive here, if there's too much government here, then you got to go to a state that has less government and where there's more opportunity. Hey, that's Florida, that's Texas, that's Tennessee, that's the Carolinas. That's what's happening.
Dabrowski said it's not the fault of the public sector employees for negotiating high salaries, but lawmakers are at fault because they approve public sector employee benefits at a price that ordinary Illinoisans can't afford.
It's not fair and it's not right to ask ordinary people to pay that kind of salary and eventually those kind of pensions to people. It's going to create such a big divide between the public sector and the private sector. You'll see more and more people leave.
I'm Katrina Peterson.
With thousands descending on the Windy City for the Democratic National Convention, the Secret Service and Chicago police say they are ready for the expected mass protest. Police Superintendent Larry Snelling says about 3,000 officers are undergoing specialized training to respond to civil unrest and possible riot.
Even if it's not an act of violence and it appears peaceful, but it's a violation of the law, blocking roadways, blocking venues, things of that nature, we will declare mass arrest in those situations.
Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle says her agency's goal for agents during the convention is to be as incognito as they can.
The footprint that we have for security is as minimal an impact to residents, businesses, neighborhoods as possible.
Dozens of organizations plan to protest in Chicago, which has denied permits for demonstrations near the United Center convention site. The convention will be held in August. The governor is expected to sign a measure which mandates schools to provide relaxation activities for Illinois students. Opponents argue that students' academic performance is suffering and yoga classes won't solve the problem. Katrina Peterson has that story.
According to new Wirepoints data, 35% of Illinois students statewide read at grade level. 27% of Illinois students statewide do math at grade level. Meanwhile, the governor is expected to sign a mandate that requires Illinois school districts to offer a weekly 20-minute session dedicated to relaxation activities in addition to regular recess. State Representative Blaine Wilhauer raised concerns about mandated yoga classes interfering with the students' religious preferences.
It certainly has its roots in spiritual activity, having its roots in Hinduism and Buddhism. And
State Representative Laura Favor-Dias argued the Pledge of Allegiance includes the phrase "under God," and therefore that practice has religious foundation. and is currently accepted in public schools.
Many of the practices that we have in daily life have historically religious origins.
The bill is expected to be signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker. I'm Katrina Peterson.
A plan to close down and rebuild the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill is forging ahead. Governor J.B. Pritzker made the announcement last March that both Stateville and the Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln would close to address critical infrastructure needs at both facilities. During a Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability meeting Tuesday evening, State Senator Don DeWitt wondered if Pritzker may change his mind and not build a new prison at Stateville.
What assurance can you give the legislature that there is even an intention to rebuild Stateville? Sorry. And I'm only asking the question because the general population in all of the DOC facilities is down.
The estimated cost to replace both prisons is $900 million. Stateville is slated to close in September. Those are the top stories of the week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square's Dan McCaleb and Katrina Peterson will further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. A new report from government watchdog Wirepoints shows more than 140,000 Illinois government sector workers and retirees received more than $100,000 in annual compensation in 2023. Wirepoints President Ted Dabrowski says that the taxpayers footing the bill, these large salaries for a growing number of government workers, is unsustainable. Greg Bishop is taking the day off, so joining me today to discuss is the Center Square Illinois reporter, Katrina Peterson. Welcome to Illinois in Focus, Kat.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I'm excited to get into it.
Some good reporting. We're going to talk about a number of your stories that you've written in the past week. Let's start with that Wirepoints report, Kat. Tell us about it.
So a little inside scoop, something that didn't quite make it into the story. Open Books, they actually had the numbers that Wirepoints was working with originally, and they said, hey, this is a 50% increase from 2018. And then you take a look at their statement that they provided after publication. They said, hey, look, in 2022, the Illinois 100,000 Club. Now, this is government workers who make over $100,000 or $100,000. And right now, as you had said, it's 140,000 government workers who receive that compensation. They call it the 100,000 Club, government workers who receive that compensation or pension. It could either be a salary or a pension or turn into a pension. So in 2022, we were looking at 132,000 public workers. And this just, quote, Open Books illustrates how out of control the state is with our tax dollars. This is what the statement says, and these are just their salaries. We can estimate another roughly 30% for perks, benefits, pension costs, things like that. So they provided numbers on top of what Wirepoints found out, that 140,000 government workers who are receiving a compensation of either $100,000 or more. So the highest paid employee was actually a neurosurgeon from UIC, and he was compensated about $700,000 roughly. And then a big chunk of the pie, as Ted Dabrowski, the president of Wirepoints, had said, goes to teachers and administrators in Illinois schools who are getting paid this pension or salary of over $100,000. Dabrowski, he gave an example. Kevin Nohelty. He's the current superintendent in Dalton, and he receives over $500,000 a year to run a school district where 14% of students can read at grade level. This is what Ted Dabrowski said. And he goes on further and says that a lot of government workers, like somebody who runs the Park District Association, that's Peter Murphy. He's the president and CEO of the Illinois Association of Park Districts, and he made $468,000. And Ted Dabrowski's sentiment was, hey, it's not right, it's not fair to ask ordinary people to pay that kind of salary and eventually those kinds of pensions, because if they're making that salary, it could turn into a pension for the rest of their life. And then he says that creates a big divide between the public sector and the private sector, and it's causing Illinoisans to leave the state.
Kat, that new data that you brought just to this Illinois Focus reporting from Open the Books, it went from 132,000 government workers and retirees making $100,000, at least $100,000 annually in 2022 to 140,000 in 2023. So an increase of $8,000 over an increase in 8,000 employees and retirees over 1 year.
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
So I mean, if you were to project that out, I mean, another year, a year after that, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows what that could be?
Right. And Open Books, they did, the numbers back in 2018, and we were looking at 94,000 government workers and pensioners with 100,000 in compensation back in 2018. So this is a 50% increase if you look at the numbers from 2023. And Dabrowski, he said, hey, look, this is a national trend. He said more and more Americans, they say, hey, quote, if you can't beat them, join them, the public sector. And a lot of these jobs, according to Ted Dabrowski, are government jobs. We're seeing an explosion of government jobs and the public sector growing, and then the private sector is shrinking. At least that's what Dabrowski said is trending in the United States overall. So this is, more so in Illinois, a problem, but also just across the board. This is happening in multiple states. Ted Dabrowski gave the example of California. That's another state that this is happening in.
Kat, I told you in pre-production that I fielded a call from a teacher, an Illinois teacher who wasn't real happy with your story on this. Said, essentially asked, do you know what teachers put up with in the classroom? Most starting teachers start at $40,000 or maybe a little bit more than that not everybody makes $100,000. So I just explained to her, though, the intent wasn't to bash teachers or any other profession. The intent of the story was to let Illinois taxpayers who are paying these salaries or paying these, whether you want to call them exorbitant or not, that are paying these pensions, they have the right to know that situation. This is a taxpayer cost at the center square. That's our job. We report stories with a taxpayer's sensibility, with a taxpayer's perspective, and we just present the facts.
A lot of it, I know that Wirepoints, they looked at, 56,000 teachers and administrators in Illinois school districts, but a lot of that could be administrators when you consider the fact that administration, those numbers have ballooned just nationally. If you look at, data, it'll show you that a lot of administration within schools have expanded despite, in Illinois' case, declining enrollment. So, maybe it's not all teachers. That 56,000 number is teachers and administrators. So it could just be the people at the tippity top within the district with these large salaries as well.
Right. But 140,000 overall. Illinois taxpayers are paying more than $100,000 a year. That grew by $8,000, 8,000 people. I keep making that mistake 1 year over year. So we'll probably come back to this story in a year again, Kat, excuse me, and see if it's grown some more. But why don't we move on? Another story you've been following pretty closely there, Kat. Plans by the state to tear down and reconstruct the Stateville Correctional Center in Will County and the Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln. They've hit a bit of a road bump. The Illinois Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability was supposed to hold a vote on the plan this past Friday, but the vote never happened. Kat, you've been covering this story, as I said. Tell us what happened with Friday's vote, and then what could happen next.
Right. So the state commission, they didn't vote, as you had said, to vote. And really what the vote was about was a recommendation. They were supposed to have a recommendation proposal about the closures of the 2 state prisons, the Logan County Correctional Facility in Lincoln, which is actually where I live, Dan. So I see the signs popping up, Save Logan County. I've been seeing billboards. There was hundreds of people who showed up in green T-shirts to the Logan County
against
Correctional.
the plan, I assume, to close the prison.
Yes. That there are, some formalities where you have to hold public hearings when you decide to close down a state facility, and this was at the public hearing for Logan County Correctional specifically. There were hundreds. I didn't go to the Statesville prison public hearing. I hear that there were hundreds of people who showed up in opposition of the closure as well. But they were supposed to just vote on a recommendation. Now, this is not this doesn't mean that the prison closures won't happen. It doesn't mean that they will happen. So on Friday, when the vote didn't happen, Kaler, he was around some supporters, Dave Kaler, State Senator Dave Kaler, and they failed to vote on it. And he said, hey, this really doesn't change anything. The governor's office can move forward with these closures regardless. The IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections, they can move forward with these closures regardless. David Smeyer, he said, quote, the reality is when you're announcing a closure to COGFA, you're required to provide a plan on that closure. And he said there wasn't really a plan here. So even if we were to have held this vote on Friday, I don't know what we would have been voting on. That was the sentiment of the few lawmakers who actually showed up to the COGFA hearing to give the Illinois Department of Corrections their recommendation on how to move forward with those closures.
So you were telling me that Governor of the Pritzker administration, who I think is behind this idea, they could still move forward. Is that correct?
Yes, they could still move forward. Now, David Smeyer, CD David Smeyer, state representative, he said that we're hopeful that we will revisit this in the near future. So they would probably have to gather together to vote on a recommendation for IDOC. But we're not sure if they're going to reschedule that in the near future. So they did not vote on recommendations. Now, that recommendation, they can still move forward without that recommendation. They don't need to vote on those recommendations, on those proposals, and what they should do.
Now, Kat, you've been covering some pretty tense issues. New legislation that's been passed requiring relaxation time in schools. Are you relaxed enough now to tell us about this?
Whew, let me breathe a little. Yes, I am relaxed enough to tell you about this story. So the governor is expected to sign Senate Bill 2872, and this pushes for schools to provide relaxation activities. Now, the original bill mandated it. It said shall. Each school district, public school district, we're talking only public schools at this point, they shall require, like they are required to provide these relaxation activities. Now, there was an amendment that clarified, hey, this isn't a mandate. This is a push from, the state legislature to provide these relaxation activities for Illinois students. So school districts, they can opt out or choose not to provide the relaxation activities. It originally was a mandate, but it got watered down through the spring session.
Now this, that's what I was going to ask you about. There was some opposition to this. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So some opponents, they raised concerns about mandated yoga classes. So the relaxation activities could include something like a yoga class. And State Representative Blaine Wilhauer raised concerns about mandated yoga classes interfering with a student's religious preferences. So the school can mandate it if they decide to opt into this. They can, say, hey, kids, you have to participate in these relaxation activities because our district decided to, take the state up on their push for these relaxation activities. So Wilhauer quoted, how do you square the thought that yoga is a spiritual activity and certainly has its roots in Hinduism and Buddhism. Well, State Representative Laura Favor-Diaz, she goes, look, we say the Pledge of Allegiance as the phrase under God in there. And, there's a lot of practices that have religious foundations that are currently accepted in public schools. So it's not really fair to, omit yoga because of its religious origins in Buddhism and Hinduism. So that was an interesting debate. Other opponents say, hey, look at the Wirepoints data where 35% of Illinois students statewide read at grade level. That means, about 70% can't read. Is this going to interfere with their time and their interactions with the teacher on, certain activity or certain academics like math, reading, writing? So that was other opposition. Hey, this is going to take away from their time with the teacher to focus on reading and math.
Good point, I guess. And that has yet to be signed by Governor Pritzker, but it's expected to. Is that correct?
Correct. Expected to. It hasn't been signed
Kat,
yet.
We're about 2 months away from the Democratic National Convention that's going to be held in Chicago in August, where all likelihood Democrats are going to formally nominate President Joe Biden for re-election. Although there's some questions about that, some behind-the-scenes questions about that. There have been concerns among city officials, state officials, DNC committee members about the ongoing protests around the country related to the Gaza-Palestine war. Chicago's already a pretty violent city with gun violence, ringing out pretty much daily. Weekends are worse. You wrote this week about... our Kevin Bessler wrote this week about the Secret Service and local and state officials and security there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So really what was explosive about this story, Dan, was the inquiry by the Chicago Office of Inspector General. And they actually had expressed concern that the current police tactics by the Chicago Police Department could infringe on First and Fourth Amendment rights. So they're doing a lot to prepare for this DNC convention. But now there's worry of, hey, police brutality. Could this be something that we're looking at going into this convention? And the Chicago Police Superintendent, Larry Snelling, says, about 3,000 officers have undergone specialized training to respond to civil unrest, something like a Gaza-Palestine protest, possible riots. They've been specialized in this specialized training to address that. So there's actual worry from the Inspector General in of the city where there could be some police brutality. Now, Larry Snelling, he says, look, even if an act of violence, if it's not an act of violence, if it, appears peaceful, but it is a violation of the law where you're blocking roadways, and if you're doing something that causes, public problems where you're blocking, the flow of traffic, we can and will declare mass arrests in those situations. So even if it, isn't a violent act, if it appears peaceful, but you're still in violation of the law, they're going to arrest you if you're causing some sort of unrest during that, convention. So that is going to be held August 19th through the 22nd at the United Center, that Democratic National Convention. And Snelling, he said that any preparations now in place remain fluid, so law enforcement agencies will look at any threats that pop up and address those as they're planning for the DNC security. So if there's, some threats going on, if they're monitoring, I'm sure, social media and maybe possible organizations that are planning some of these protests, they're going to address their training and preparation as needed as things arise.
Prepared, Kat, because we're going to have some staff in Chicago. Greg Bishop's going to be there, Tony Euskis, who oversees Blue Room Stream, and Brett Rowland, who sometimes fills in on Illinois in Focus. He's going to be there covering Their safety is our primary concern, as it should be for everybody who's in Chicago for that event. Thank you for joining us today. It was a delight talking with you about all things Illinois. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.